All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're looking at a couple of really interesting voice notes from Robert Hastrick Timmy.
Yeah, Morpheus thinks online.
Exactly. Recorded just a few weeks after Trump took office back in early 2025. I think these voice notes really capture that feeling in the air, like a sort of a snapshot of this incredibly intense moment in history.
It's amazing how much raw emotion comes through these recordings. There's this real sense of anxiety, especially about where things are going with this new Trump administration. I mean, they really hit the ground running.
Yeah, and he keeps using this term muzzle velocity. It's not exactly everyday language, is it?
Right, it's a military term, basically describing how fast a bullet leaves a gun. Kind of intense.
So how does it apply to Trump?
Well, it's a metaphor. He's using it to describe the sheer speed and force of the changes that Trump is making. It's like bam, 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 one thing after another.
It's like we're all caught in the blast radius, right?
Exactly. Remember, this is just weeks into his presidency, and already we're seeing executive orders flying left and right, policies getting completely reversed, and America taking a much more aggressive stance on the world stage. I mean, it was enough to leave everyone kind of breathless, even people who voted for Trump.
And he gives some pretty wild examples in these voice notes, too. In just a few weeks, Trump's talking about buying Greenland. He's suggesting relocating the population of Gaza, putting pressure on South Africa over their land reform policies. He even throws out the idea of Canada becoming like the 51st state.
Yeah, it was a level of activity that was pretty hard to wrap your head around. Think about what it must have felt like to be there. You've just gotten used to Biden's way of doing things, and then suddenly you're thrown into this absolute whirlwind of change. No wonder Robert was feeling overwhelmed.
He actually compares it to a coup at one point, says it feels like a deliberate attempt to force a new world order into being. It's not just changing policies, it's like a fundamental shift in power, and that's what's really worrying him.
And this muzzle velocity metaphor really captures that, doesn't it? It's not just about the speed, it's about the force, the impact, the feeling of being caught completely off guard. I think he's not just commenting on the events themselves, but trying to understand the motives behind them. That's where the anxiety really comes through.
He's genuinely worried about where all of this is headed. And it's not just about domestic policy either. He's particularly concerned about what's happening in Ukraine and the role that he believes the previous administration played in escalating the conflict. Now, that's where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah, Robert's take on the whole Ukraine war is what's definitely a controversial one.
To say the least.
He basically lays the blame for the whole thing right at the feet of the Biden administration.
He really doesn't hold back either. In the voice notes, he's arguing that Biden pushing for Ukraine to join NATO is like, well, poking the bear.
Yeah.
Right? He says it was like crossing this red line for Russia, and it basically forced them into a corner. They had no choice but to react. And he's absolutely convinced that if Trump had been in office, the invasion would have never even happened. He believes that Trump had a much better understanding of how to deal with Russia and that he could have prevented things from escalating to that point.
And, that's a view that actually does align with some foreign policy experts, like Jeffrey Sachs, for example.
Yeah.
They've also been very critical of how much the West got involved in Ukraine. They say expanding NATO was a huge mistake. It just needlessly provoked Russia, and the focus should have been on finding a peaceful solution instead of, just throwing more fuel on the fire.
It's interesting, though, because even though Robert was a big Trump supporter, he starts to have some doubts about Trump's own, pretty aggressive moves on the world stage. He seems to be struggling a bit to reconcile his belief in strong leadership with, I guess you could say, a desire for peace and stability.
That's a tension that a lot of people were feeling at the time. You want a leader who's going to stand up for America's interests, right? But then you see the potential consequences of that approach playing out in a conflict like Ukraine. It makes you wonder, are strength and aggression always the best answer?
Yeah, Robert even goes as far as to say that Biden's actions are directly responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths in Ukraine and Russia and even Gaza. He feels very strongly that Russia had drawn a clear line in the sand and that the West should have respected it.
You really hear the emotional weight of the whole situation for him here. He's not just talking about, abstract policy anymore. He's talking about real people's lives. It's clear that he's really troubled by all the suffering the conflict is causing, and he's worried that things could spiral even further out of control.
And that fear of things spiraling out of control seems to connect pretty directly to another one of his big concerns. This idea of a forcible remaking of a new world order. It's like he sees what's happening in Ukraine as just one piece of a much larger and much more, I guess, sinister puzzle, this whole new world order thing. It really jumps out at you when you listen to these voice notes. Like he's convinced that there's something much bigger happening, something behind the scenes, and it's not exactly, well, good.
Right. And remember, it's only been a few weeks since Trump took office at this point. Things are changing really fast, and Robert's trying to make sense of it all. He keeps coming back to this idea of a deliberate shift in global power, almost like it's being orchestrated.
He even mentions this thing called Project 25. I'd never even heard of it before.
Yeah, it's this plan, kind of a blueprint for a very, very conservative vision of America. If it went through, things would be pretty different.
Some big changes.
Yeah, and the thing is, there are these rumors. We don't know for sure, but some people believe Trump might actually be connected to Project 25. So you can see why Robert, and probably a lot of others at the time, started to feel like there was this hidden agenda behind all these rapid changes.
And it's not just Trump either. Robert sees Elon Musk and these huge tech companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook as part of this new power structure. Like they're all working together to reshape the world. And he's not so sure it's going to be for the best.
It does feel like that muzzle velocity thing again, doesn't it?
Totally. And it's important to remember we're hearing just one person's perspective here, but it does reflect a very real anxiety a lot of people were feeling. It makes you think about how fast things change, and is it always progress? Are there going to be some unintended consequences? Do you think this whole idea of a new world order, does it resonate with you at all?
It definitely makes you think.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting part. Robert doesn't just dwell on all this doom and gloom. He actually offers a pretty radical solution.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
And
He sees AI as a way to kind of cut through all the messiness of human politics. You know, all the biases, self-interest, all the emotional baggage that gets in the way of making rational decisions. He thinks AI could actually offer unbiased solutions to all these complex problems.
wow. He even connects this to Michio Kaku's idea of a type 1 civilization. Kaku basically says that to reach the next level of civilization, humans need to overcome their divisions and learn to cooperate on a global scale. Robert seems to think that AI could be the key to actually making that happen.
It's a pretty bold idea, right?
Yeah.
To think that technology could solve the problems that humans haven't been able to. But it really speaks to the level of hope and maybe desperation that Robert and probably a lot of other people were feeling at that moment. It's like they were searching for anything that could offer a way out of all the chaos.
So we've gone from the muzzle velocity of the Trump administration to a pretty controversial take on the war in Ukraine. And now we've landed on this wild idea of AI as a political savior. It's been a fascinating deep dive into one person's thoughts and anxieties and hopes at a really pivotal moment in history. It definitely makes you think about the forces that are shaping the world around us and what role we each play in navigating the changes that are coming. What are your takeaways? What questions are you left with after this deep dive?